Hello, everybody. Welcome to Brunch with Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. I'm your host, BMR. If this is your first time here, please subscribe, give a thumbs up, and hit the alert bell. Share us out. You can find us on YouTube at Bigfoot, Michigan Rob, at Texas Front Porch. We're on Odyssey Radio, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, wherever podcasts are found. We're also found on KPNL Radio. Thank you to the lovely Aunt Selene out in Oregon for that one. You can also find us on Facebook at Texas Front Porch and email at Cryptid Encounters or Beyond BMR at gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe. Bigfoot, Michigan Rob, Texas Front Porch, the Blinds and Booze Paranormal Podcast. Don't forget the Super Chat is open. Yes, the Super Chat is open. And long after the show ends, so is the Super Thanks. If you want to check that out, your donations are most appreciated. You can also go to our About pages and our description pages to find out what's going on throughout the week. I'll cut back the music here. Thanks for everybody for joining us tonight. And I'll give you a rundown of the schedule right quick. We got a fabulous guest, Aleks Petakov. Familiar with him, filmmaker, documentarian with Small Town Monsters. We'll be bringing him up shortly. But first of all, Mondays is Texas Front Porch, 7:30 in the East. Tuesdays, Van Buren Variety at 8 o'clock in the East. Beyond the BMR, 9 o'clock in the East. Miss Jason McLean does something at 10 in the East on Mysterious Library on Untold Radio AM. Go check him out, 10 o'clock in the East. That's on Tuesdays. Wednesdays, we're right back with Jason McLean Questions Everything with myself and Donnie Show, 9 in the East. Thursdays, right here, Brunch with Bigfoot, Michigan Rob, 1 o'clock in the East. Later on that night, tonight, in fact, 9 in the East, the Blondes and Booze Paranormal Podcast. Then we end the week on Friday. If you need some woo with the booze, we got the Blondes and Booze and the Woo, again, Fridays, 9 o'clock in the East. Don't forget my lovely friend, Jessica Jones, Spaced Out Radio, Saturday and Sunday, 10 in the East. And she also has her own channel over there, The Cryptid Huntress. Please go check her out. Thanks for joining us here today. I'm going to bring up Krista. You know, I had Brandy and Krista written down here for something, and Brandy was ahead of Krista, and I love you both equally. Let's just do that right now. Love you both equally. I don't have any favorites. You're both blondes. You're both beautiful. I love you both.
Okay, I'll let you slide. That's fine.
Right. You know, and I hate talking about this to start my day. 20 minutes ago, you guys, as you all know, good old BMR. Yeah, I had the winter storm come through. Pipes broke. Finally got the adjuster out. Finally assessed the damage. Took forever. 1,000 claims where I live. 20 minutes before the show, I discovered another leak, Krista. And, you know, I just put my hands up. I said, I cannot be mad about it. The guys are coming out Saturday. Just another thing to add to the repair list. And there you go. Michigan winters.
At least you noticed it before they came and not after.
Yes, indeed. So that's what I got going on.
Yeah.
And, but other than that, you know, things are pretty good. How you doing?
I'm doing good, actually. I've got a super busy day today. Got a kid with a doctor's appointment, and then my grandson's doing a singing solo tonight at his school, so I'm flying over there. And then come back and do my own show tonight. So
yeah. Well, Speaking of shows, I've been really looking forward to this one.
Me too.
We've got an awesome filmmaker, documentarian, Aleks Petakov.
Yeah, we had him on Blondes, and it was an amazing.
You did. Fantastic show.
Yep.
And he's agreed to join us here today. He's also with Small Town Monsters. If you guys have not seen that, go subscribe to them over on YouTube. So I'm not going to talk about him. I'll let him talk a little bit about himself, and I will bring him up, make sure he's squared away. It looks like he is. Hey, Aleks.
Hey, how's it going? How are you guys doing?
You know, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. You know, I was a little let down that I had that, as you probably heard backstage, about my little issues that I've been having with the weather. But you know what I said? I have a great guest on, a great show slated for everybody. And thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on.
Not a problem. You know, before we get started, a lot of people probably know Small Town Monsters. They've probably heard of you and seen your wonderful documentaries. If you could just give us a walk through and tell our audience what you're all about here.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, kind of fashioned myself as a cryptozoology researcher. So, looking into some of the various cryptids and stories that are out there, whether it be Sasquatch, or I've done stuff on the Lake Champlain monster, mystery big cats, mountain lions. That's another big topic I'm really interested in. So that's kind of what I'm most known for, is probably, as you mentioned, some of the small town monsters stuff. So Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, which is a series we do over on the Small Town Monsters YouTube channel. And that basically is documentary series that it follows my investigations into various Sasquatch stories and reports across across North America, honestly, at this point. And mostly, into different areas of the United States. We've been to a lot of different locations, and the whole idea behind the series is that it's an honest approach to the subject. We don't fake anything or add any unnecessary drama. There's plenty of drama that happens when you're with a bunch of dudes in the woods and investigating. You don't need to add any, trust me.
Right.
And we basically just hope to portray the stories that we come across as accurately, whether that be eyewitnesses or things that come up along the way, and just sort of tell it how it is. If we have something happen, we'll show you, we'll tell you. If not, we're not going to add in anything that didn't happen, or kind of really dramatize it like a lot of, unfortunately, TV and stuff will do. So that's kind of the long story short. I'm also an outdoorsman, done a lot of hiking and backpacking, and just love being out in the woods. So coupling that with the filmmaking and the research side, it's kind of a fun way to combine all those passions.
And you mentioned something that what I do really love most about this. One of the things I love most, I should say, is when you sit down and do your documentaries, your films, you don't sit here. You're not one of these persons that says this is an actual Bigfoot print. This is a Bigfoot scream or howl. You always use alleged, or I don't know what that is. This is definitely something different. So, I find a lot of people, I respect that, because right off the get-go, it's like, so this guy's down to earth, doesn't know really what it is. We have our suspicions. So is that something that you just kind of felt that, I wanted to be as truthful as possible, because if I don't know something, I don't know it?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been pretty skeptical, I think, of bold claims. And I mean, I've always been interested in these topics. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of what you see is that people jump the gun in terms of something they think is Bigfoot, or, just because they hear a noise, they don't know what it is. It has to be that. So maybe they have that sort of Bigfoot on the brain, as people like to call it. I think just thinking for yourself and really being able to say, okay, well, I don't know what that sound is, but there's a whole list of candidates of things it could be before I jump to the conclusion. Maybe you should try to deduce from other examples. I mean, there's been times in the past we've all been fooled by different hoaxes and things that come out online. I remember in high school when the 2008 Georgia Bigfoot hoax was going on, and these guys were claiming they had a Bigfoot body, and I was really excited. I know a lot of other people were, and when it turned out to be a big hoax, I think that was sort of a great learning moment for a lot of people. Really don't trust what you hear, especially from online, people you don't know. I mean, just do your research, do your due diligence, and investigate those claims. You take it with a grain of salt. So even when I have somebody tell me their eyewitness encounter, I'm not wholeheartedly going to believe it right away. I want to get to kind of know the person. I want to talk to them a little bit, see if there's any indication, is there a weird motive? Are they trying to get just on camera? Is that why they're telling me this story? Right. Or, and so over the years, I've talked to a lot of people, even just aside from doing the filmmaking stuff in my own home state of New Hampshire. I've documented a lot of reports, and I've had people report encounters to me. And a lot of those stories, I mean, it's like pulling teeth to try to get them to tell you these encounters. And they're people that come from maybe a very professional background, or they're very, adapted to being in the woods. And it's like, they don't want to tell you this story very openly. And that really intrigues me and says, well, okay, they've got something that they have no reason to gain anything from, and they're telling me this. So when I see some of the stuff out there that people claim is Bigfoot, I think it unfortunately kind of affects the ones that have had real encounters, that they genuinely see something, they don't understand what it is, or it's not supposed to exist, supposedly, according to most of society. And because those people see the sort of the tomfoolery that goes on online, whether it be the fake shows or all the stuff that's going on, those people get more and more reluctant to share their encounters.
Mm-hmm.
So I just try to take a level-headed approach because, a good example is I was always interested in the story of Loch Ness, and I got to visit there in 2015, and that was kind of my first sort of cryptid documentary. I did a terrible 12-minute short documentary on the Loch Ness monster. Looking back on it now, I wouldn't watch it, but I actually came out of that more skeptical of there's something of something like Nessie existing based on the habitat, which I thought was kind of interesting. So after that, I looked into the Lake Champlain monster, which I had kind of neglected, even though I lived only about 3 hours from Lake Champlain. I never looked into it. It's funny. I was obsessed with something that was overseas in the UK. And then I kind of reversed my roles, and now I'm more interested in the Champ stuff than I am in the Nessie stuff.
Right.
So I would like to say, I just try to be as skeptical as I can with a lot of this stuff. And a lot of times in the woods, especially I think nowadays, people aren't as familiar with things. I mean, there are great woodsmen, outdoorsmen out there, outdoorsmen and women all over the place. But I'd say there's less now than there was at any point in history. I mean, even 200 years ago, our ancestors all lived much closer to the land in general. I mean, a lot more people farmed, a lot more people lived more, I would say, closer to nature, whereas now everything's going urban and kind of suburban. So I think people lose touch with things that they experience in the woods, so maybe they're not familiar with it. And I just stress people, if you do encounter something weird, unless you see like an 8-foot tall Sasquatch in front of you, I mean, then you probably don't need a lot of convincing. But if you have something you're kind of not sure with, try to cross-reference, look for other known animals that maybe could explain that. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens. Known animals will do a lot of weird things. So to make, kind of shorten my answer here a little bit, I guess I just try to take it. I'm very hard to convince, I suppose. So unless I see something that's really compelling, I'm not going to say, well, this is definitely a sign of a Sasquatch and, that kind of thing, unless it has to be something very kind of smoking gun sort of thing overall. So I know a lot of people maybe have a lower criteria for evidence, but I try to keep it pretty high and pretty strict.
Yeah, and I think that's a good approach to it. It's kind of a segue into my next question. But before I get into that, I think that what you say is spot on. I think you have to have a healthy dose of skepticism, right? Could be constructive about it. Yeah. I have a tendency to believe a lot of stories, and I think they're true. I think people are seeing something because I personally have seen one, and I know they exist. So I'm more on the side of like when someone tells me something, I'm like, oh yeah, wow. But there's so many stories that have a lot of commonalities, and that's where you know that there's not 500,000 people saying kind of the identical thing, but maybe in a different fashion. So those I give a lot more credit to than somebody that says, I seen a Bigfoot fall off the moon, right? I mean, come on, just I'm being sarcastic, but I think we're on the same page. And you did the coastal. Now we're not going to. I got a lot of different questions, but one thing you just made mention of is you got that email. You did the coastal Alaskan Sasquatch, which, by the way, everybody go check that out. It's got 1.6 million views. Congratulations. Awesome. Yeah. And I think you got another 350,000 on part 2. So go check out the show, everybody. Awesome documentary.
Well worth the watch.
Well worth it. And before I ask this question, my mind, I tell you what, you brought out Alaska, that coastline, the various bays, the inlets. That's such a beautiful, beautiful way you did that, man. I mean, I could live there, and I'm a summer guy. I could live there.
It's like one of a kind place. I mean, Alaska is just in a class of its own, I think, in terms of that wilderness. There's a reason why it's called the last frontier, right? It has that, evokes that sort of romantic image of still a place that has yet to be conquered. And it really, I mean, Alaska has a population of, about 700,000, I think. There's technically more caribou in Alaska than there are human beings. So it's still one of these places that's very wild and rugged. And that place is just one of the most stunning places I've ever been.
I mean, it was the first thing when I turned on that video. And again, you got a lot of beautiful, all of your videos are beautiful scenery. You do a great job, and you really put the time and effort into that. And I do appreciate that, because that stuck me in. I even wrote in the description for this show, even if you're not a Bigfoot guy or a cryptid person, you got to watch the show anyway, just for the beauty and the way you put the story together. and the way you edited the story, fantastic. So you don't even have to be liking this. Just go watch it. It's a great show.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, I get a lot of emails, and I've gotten a lot of comments and like Instagram messages. People will send me messages, Facebook, whatever, of people that are like, hey, I've never really been into the Bigfoot stuff, but I stumbled across your guys' videos, started watching them, and they're like, I'm total skeptic when it comes to Bigfoot, but I've just enjoyed going along for the ride. And I've even had a couple of people tell me they thought they started actually looking into the Bigfoot topic based off of some of our videos, because they thought, it wasn't just everyone saying everything's Bigfoot. It was a little bit more down to earth. So that's really cool. And another big thing with that whole concept with that series is to really inspire people to just get outside and go to some of these places, maybe learn something new about some of these natural areas and say, hey, I can go do that myself and go out into these woods. I mean, you don't have to be some elite researcher or something to do this stuff. You can, if you want to go outside and enjoy, I think that's absolutely part of, a big part of what we do.
I think part of like you just getting there. So once you got to Alaska, how long did it actually take you to get to that cabin?
So it's
one quick thing though. Then we go right on to yours, Krista, because this is kind of the follow up, the beginning of your follow up. What was it that intrigued you in that email? Because that's a journey. You had it. You just mentioned your healthy skepticism, and you had to travel across to Alaska. There had been something in that email, and I know you said it on the show, but for those who haven't seen it, what was it that drew you to this location from that email you were sent?
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of emails and a lot of messages in general, people telling me their stories, and I appreciate it. And there's so many places I'd love to go. People keep telling me, oh, you got to come up to Michigan, you got to come to Alabama. Believe me, I'd love to. There's just so much I can try to fit into a season. But that email in particular that I got it was like April or May of 2021. So basically a full year before we actually went. It just seemed sincere. And actually the guy, the cabin owner, Scott, was originally from my neck of the woods in the Northeast. He had a long military background, very professional guy. I mean, he works in a very professional industry. It was kind of unusual that he would want to be associated with the topic of Sasquatch, but that's one factor. But just a lot of those sounds and some of the audio that was presented that he had sent me, and I got to talk to him, and he was basically saying, hey, if you need to talk to anyone who I've taken out there, feel free to talk to him. He was giving me the contact info of some of his friends. I talked to a guy who had kind of a biology background who had experienced some stuff out there. It's just kind of the whole picture. But those sounds were really intriguing, especially knowing that David Ellis of the Olympic Project was one of the guys who had analyzed some of that audio. So, Scott had sent him the raw audio, and David had found a lot of that stuff. And David is somebody that I think is very interesting and does a great job in terms of audio. He may know the most, or be one of a few people that knows so much about alleged Bigfoot audio that it's kind of ridiculous the amount of time he spent actually looking into some of this stuff. So that was definitely intriguing. And the location, because it wasn't, just a cabin you could drive to 25 miles outside of town, it was a place that you physically had to take a boat to over an hour long. I mean, you're on the Kenai Peninsula, which is a few hours south of Anchorage, which is the place where you'd fly into. And then you've got to drive another 3 hours to get onto the Kenai Peninsula. And there's different parts of it that are 4 hours between. So it was a long trip down there. And then getting out there, it's over an hour boat ride just to get to this location. And so it's pretty much as isolated as you can possibly be. The chances of people being out there, I mean, you physically cannot access the location unless you were to take a helicopter there or a float plane or a boat. I mean, that's how remote it is. There's no road, there's nothing to get there. So that eliminates a lot of the possibilities of people doing weird things, or maybe somebody living in the woods that's kind of trying to keep people off of their property or something like that. It really narrows it down to, okay, it's interesting. I mean, there's been other stories of remote cabins, places like Snellgrove Lake and others over the years that have similar kind of things going on, which I think is intriguing. So this sort of reminded me of that, but nobody had really looked into it. I know there was a couple other groups, like the NAWAC at one point was looking at the property, and there's somebody they're an organization that I look to, and I think they do great work. So that was intriguing too. Combine that with the Olympic Project. Yeah. It just it really was enticing. And I got to know the man behind it all, behind the property that was Scott. Very trustworthy guy. I've become friends with him, and great, fantastic person. And he built this place to be a fishing retreat, kind of a retreat for weekends with buddies. Yeah. He wasn't going out there to look for Bigfoot. I mean, this is the last thing that was probably on his mind. It was just, hey, I need to build this place so I can have a place to go hang out, do halibut and fish for all kinds of stuff there. The salmon runs and everything they get out there in Alaska, just ridiculous. So that's pretty much the whole story. Everything behind it really was interesting. And I thought, okay, this is a great chance to look at this location. And it's by far been one of the most interesting cases I've had the chance to work on. And I've had a lot of cool cases I worked on, but this one, I think just the location, everything combined really stuck out to me.
Yeah, that's why I was curious as to how long it took, because I would think just the ride getting there is beautiful, so no matter how long it took, yeah.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, you're driving through the highway that goes through the Kenai Peninsula, just in between these giant mountains and snow-capped peaks and fjords and all this stuff. It's just absolutely insane. It's just how scenic the drive is to get down there. And then you're getting on a boat and going out even further into an area where you're, it's risky because you are, if you drive somewhere, sure, you get hurt, you can hike out, you can be driven to the hospital, or have maybe more of a fighting chance. Out there, I mean, you're on a boat, so you have an extra added complication. Maybe the Coast Guard might be the best bet in a situation like that. I mean, when we were out there, we actually listened over marine radios that they have, which go quite a long distance, of somebody that had an accident out on a boat in the Gulf of Alaska. And we have no idea how far it was. Could have been 20, 30 miles from us, but somebody had fallen and hit their head, and we were listening to it on the radios because you could hear it, because they basically beamed that to all the marine radios in the area.
Gotcha.
And we're listening to this story, and they're saying, oh, her pupils are disappearing. So this lady was possibly unconscious, and they were racing to get back to the port. And it was like an hour-long trip. And I think she did end up surviving, but it was like we're listening to it on edge, kind of, because it's a matter of time, and you're in such an isolated place. Sure. I mean, we don't know how far out into the Gulf of Alaska they were, but it doesn't sound like they were close to town. So, and
what time of the? I'm sorry, I was just going to ask, what time of the year was this that you were there?
We were in May. We were there in May, so we spent about 2.5. No, it was about 3 weeks up in May. So we got there early May, and we basically left around the end of the month. So we saw Alaska go from basically winter to summer all in those couple weeks. I mean, where you still have some cover of darkness at night for the first few kind of weeks, or the first week. And then towards the end of the trip, especially after the cabin, we went up to interior Alaska up near Denali National Park. And I mean, it would be like midnight, and the sun would basically just go behind the mountains and come back up 2 hours later. Wow. And so it doesn't really get dark. And then in July, it'll be dark there pretty much constantly, or, whatever time of the month you're going in the summer.
Yeah, excuse me. That was a pretty good question, Chris, because I was wondering, it was like, again, I heard that Alaska, you get 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of night, and sometimes some parts go to 24 and 24, right? But on your one video with the coastal, there was ample amount of daylight and darkness. So I was just wondering what the discrepancy was. Was it like 8 hours of daylight and the rest was dark, or vice versa? Or
I mean, when we first got there, so I mean, if I look on the calendar, it was like, I want to say the 5th or the 6th of May that we got there. So we were out at the cabin by the 7th or the 8th, and we basically spent, 8 nights, almost 9 days out there. You give the first day we traveled, we got there maybe in the afternoon, and the 9th day we left in the morning to get back. But those first few days, it got dark enough that we saw a few stars twinkling. You could see some stars. Okay. By the end of our 9 days, we couldn't really see stars. It was like just a really dark kind of dusk. So it wasn't fully dark, but it was dark enough that if you were walking through the woods without a flashlight, you'd probably trip and smack into a tree. So it was, it was like by 9-10 p.m., the sun would kind of start going down. So by midnight, 1 a.m., it was dark. And then basically till around 4 or 5 a.m., that's when the sun would kind of come up. So you don't have a long window of darkness, but it was there. And like I said, we watched it go from really kind of actually dark for the first few nights to more of like a dusk. And if we had been there a couple weeks after that, it pretty much would have been a lighter dusk. And then you get into July, June and July, and it's a lot more, you have maybe just 2 hours of kind of that dusk, and it kind of keeps narrowing down. But Alaska's weird like that. I mean, you have that in the summer months, and then in winter months, they'll have a few hours of daylight and more darkness.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. Hey, I was going to ask you too, Alex. It's like, well, first of all, Alex did not pay me to pay these compliments, but I have to tell you, of all the videos I've watched, I was kind of disappointed when it ended. I wanted to keep going, man. I'm just saying that. That's me being honest. You guys, you got to check this stuff out. It's awesome. The entire channel is awesome, and he's up. And what I wanted to get into, because I found fascinating, was, and I put on the headphones like always, and I just replayed all of the sounds on both part 1 and part 2, right, that you heard. Now the one with the seals, that kind of threw me off. The what was it, the sea lions? I didn't know. I never heard that before. I said, what the hell is that?
It's weird, man.
And then, man, that kind of freaked me out.
When I heard that first on the audio, my eyes lit up, and then I'm like, okay, hold on, pump the brakes. And then I started cross-referencing, and okay, sea lions. Well, we know they were there, and we would hear them multiple nights. But
and throughout the listening to these sounds, now I heard ones that were familiar. We heard some familiar whoops. I mean, we can say that. There were sounds that I could not recognize, and we always heard about apparently rocks being dropped off, thrown into the ocean, right, along the coastline. But also there were some sounds, Alex, I don't know if you feel the same way. They were flat haunting. There was some, I tell you what, I'm not going to say they gave me chills. I'm not going to say that, go that far, but there was some of these vocalizations that were like, wow, really made me keep looping it over and over and over again, saying, what the heck is that?
Yeah, some of that stuff, especially the stuff they've recorded in previous years, really weird. I mean, like you said, a lot of the stuff people that are into Bigfoot are probably familiar with. You've got those familiar whoops, kind of like the long howls, whistles. I mean, I had a couple people tell me that they heard the whistling in that, and they say, oh, that's exactly what I heard in the woods in upstate New York or wherever else, other parts of the country. And the knocks and that sort of stuff. The stuff that we heard, the rock throwing, it was just weird because it would happen at certain moments of the night, and you'd only get 1 or 2 or 3, and that would be it. I mean, we heard one of them towards the end of part 1 where, we could literally hear the rocks smashing against the shore and then going into the water. But probably the most unsettling for me and the most interesting, I have to say, would be the baby crying audio. And that's just like a footnote within the overall documentary. But that is something that I think we're going to focus a lot more on because, and I've talked about this a lot. I was just talking to a researcher up there in Alaska yesterday who's been to this cabin. He was actually Larry Beans Baxter, the guy who was at the end of part 2 collecting that handprint that we found with the sample. And, we're talking about this baby crying thing. It's just so perplexing because with the baby crying sound, so these guys basically, this will be, I think, the 5th or 6th season going out there to this cabin, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it was a couple of years before COVID that they built it, and they had all this stuff going on the first 2 seasons. And this baby crying sound, they've only ever heard twice and recorded it once. And both of those occasions was when women were present. And women aren't really brought out there a whole lot just because, I mean, for the most part, it's kind of like a guys hunting or guys fishing kind of retreat, right? Guys getting away from their wives or whatever for a weekend. And so that is really unusual because I would expect, if it's some other animal, and I've tried to cross-reference to, I've had people suggest baby porcupines, they make crying noises, baby otters, sea otters, all kinds of stuff, just things that would kind of try to fit that. And foxes even, I've tried everything. I haven't found anything that matches up. But what I would expect is that those guys go out there a lot, right? Especially during the summer seasons. I mean, they get out there basically from around late March, April to possibly early October, and that's it. You don't get out during any other months. It's just the seas are too rough to get out there. So it's effectively kind of closed off for the season. But all the times they've been out there, I mean, they've only twice they've heard this baby crying sound, and it's when women have been present. Why not hear that at other occasions if it's just a regular animal? That for me is really weird. I can't draw a conclusion, but it's just unusual that it's only with the women. Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, what was so unusual about that was how that was going on at this property. And then you have Alaskan native stories they talk about of the otter man or the Kushtaka, which they basically describe as a hairy man-like creature that they see swimming in between channels. They don't describe it as looking like an otter necessarily, at least from what I've heard, which is intriguing because you have Class A witness reports of Sasquatches seen swimming between ocean channels in Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Southeast Alaska. And that's where these tribes in Southeast Alaska and into the Kenai Peninsula talk about this Petakov. But what's weird about it is they say it makes a baby crying sound to lure women and children into the woods.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we just, Tom Cardos just commented on that could possibly even be a skinwalker.
Yeah, I mean, so it's, in my mind, I hear the story of like something like the Otter Man, and I think, okay, that's a Sasquatch being seen swimming between channels and the baby crying noise. And while we were doing our project, Seth and the rest of the crew were in other parts of Alaska interviewing a lot of eyewitnesses and researchers, and they talked to a lot of natives as well who independently shared stories of hearing baby crying noises in the woods, or their elders would warn them, don't go in the woods because of the baby crying sounds. That was the hairy man or the Kushtaka making those noises. So the fact that you've got a property that's not connected with any of that native culture or anything like that, it's just somebody that built it out there, purchased it, and they are having experienced that in conjunction with women being around. It's just really intriguing. And again, I could be totally wrong. Could be a known animal doing something very unusual, but just the coincidental factor is so strange. Again, I would expect somebody in all those years to have heard it at least on another occasion if it's just a normal thing. I mean, but the woman aspect is unusual. I mean, is it another animal sensing that women are there? I mean, I don't know. That in itself would be interesting too, but it's just strange. And that part was definitely the most creepy and unsettling. Like when I'd play that audio for people, they would be like, whoa, that's kind of weird.
I found that creepy too. And correct me if I'm wrong, and you might have mentioned it. I was doing something in chat. Was there 2 women out there?
Yes. When
they heard it on separate occasions, independent of each other too.
Yes,
is that correct?
That's exactly right. So the first time they had heard it, it was when I believe Scott's wife was out there with them, and he made a note of it. The first year at the cabin, they used to make a note of all the weird incidents, and I read his full journal, and it was like every time they were out there was something. Oh, heard a rocket burn at the roof, or heard the hollow baseball bat knocks. And then it was like June 24th or 25th, there was an entry like heard baby crying noise in the woods, weird. And he had actually spoken to some other researchers. I think David Ellis was one of them. And he said, hey, we heard this weird baby crying sound. And I think one of the first questions, if it was either David Ellis or Dr. Robert Alley, I'm not sure who it was, but I know Scott would have the detail on that. But he's basically, this researcher told him, well, did you have women with you? That was like the first question he asked. And he said, okay, go back to the journal entry. And he found out it was actually I believe it was his wife's friend's birthday then. So they looked at it. Yeah, that they would have been out there then on that first occasion. And then the other one was as the one he recounted in the episode, which was his wife and her friend again out there, and they were independently doing stuff. One was berry picking, one was using the outhouse, and they both heard this noise, and they had been aware of it. They were told by Scott, well, this is what we heard last time, whatever, when there was women out there. So they independently kind of experienced this, but kind of they brushed it off. They told each other. And then they sort of were like, okay, we gotta talk to Scott about this. And they tell him, and he's like, oh, well, if you guys heard it, I recorded it. He had the recorder out in the woods that he hangs on a tree up there, and we would see him deploy it, and we would deploy our audio recorders out there as well. And so he had that recorded. So that's where that recording comes from, which is, I mean, awesome that they have it, because a lot of times you hear stories of this, but there's no audio or anything like that. And that audio is just really, to me, one of the creepiest ones. It's pretty compelling. So that's something we are definitely going to be examining further. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, that audio, it really is pretty cool. And like I say, it's familiar but yet very strange and odd that I had not experienced. So I thought that was pretty sweet. What I also found to be kind of, maybe not odd, but kind of like, I think that maybe you guys were being watched a little bit, or others up there, only because it seemed like you made mention in your program, in your film, it seemed like every time somebody was taken from the boat back to the mainland, I guess you would call it, is when you would hear some crazy sounds again outside the cabin would take place.
Yeah, that was weird. We call it the mystery gunshot phenomena.
Yeah.
Because for lack of a better word, and I've had a lot of people tell me, well, what about it? Was it a glacier? I mean, there is a glacier, but it'd have to be like 10 or so miles, because we actually took a boat ride out to go try to hike this glacier, and it's like miles from where we landed on the boat, which was miles from the cabin. So it was, I mean, I don't know if that sound could travel that far, but I mean, there was snow in the area. We did hear possible avalanches at one point, but it's a very distinctive noise. It's kind of like a rumbling. We didn't witness any large avalanches because there is a huge chain of mountains right across the bay from there. And, we didn't see any massive avalanches while we were there. That was towards the end of the snow there. In a couple of weeks after that, it would have been mostly melted. But so two of the incidents that happened were, one was the second day we were there, the first kind of full day. We decided to go out, and that was in sort of the beginning of part one, where we're taking the boat out. They put us in the big boat, and then they put us in a Zodiac, kind of like a dinghy, to get to the other side of the shore, because it's deceptively far away. It's all the same bay, but it looks like, oh, this is just right around the bend. But you're walking along these rocky beaches. It would take you a long time just to get to the other side. So it was easier to just load up in the boat, get everyone together. No one's going to slip on the beach or anything like that in a long walk. And we go out there, and we're coming back. We were basically exploring these cabins that were there. There's a couple of old cabins. There actually was a settlement there in that bay 100 or so years ago that, like many Alaskan coastal settlements that was based on logging and fishing, just died off. So kind of like the Port Chatham story that a lot of people like to talk about. The Bigfoots killed everyone, and that's why they abandoned the town. Not necessarily. It was more economic reasons, because, it was just hard labor. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of these communities that just vanished. So there was supposedly an old cabin out there we tried to find. We did find another cabin out there that's in the video. And that one looks like it's more recent. I mean, maybe no one's been there in 10, 15 years. I mean, it didn't look super decrepit, but it didn't look like anyone had been there in a while. Because there are people that own cabins and properties in rural Alaska that maybe they live in the lower 48 US. They never get up there. So they don't have a boat. You can't really get out the property. So we spent the day exploring the area, a lot of deep snow. And when we start getting back to the shore, we noticed the guys in the boat are already halfway towards us. We're like, oh, we didn't even radio them or call them. We were going to get to the beach, get the Zodiac set up and give them a call. And they pick us up and they're like, hey, did you guys shoot your gun? I mean, we're all armed out there, obviously, because you've got not grizzly bear, but brown bears, same thing as grizzly bears. They get bigger along the coast. Moose, you've got lynx, all this other stuff. And we're like, no one shot a gun. They said, oh, well, we heard what, John was up in the window in his room in the cabin. He thought he heard a gunshot. So he said maybe something was wrong. And then we get out to the deck and we see you guys out on the shore. So we figured maybe there was some incident with an animal or something, and they're coming out to get us. And we didn't shoot them. And they said they heard it a couple times too. So that's why they came out to get us. And that was like, okay, weird. But it's like right when we were getting out of the tree line. And then the other incident happened. This was in part two, towards the end of the trip. There was this kind of lazy afternoon. It was a very foggy and cloudy day. And basically the guys and all of us there went to take a nap in like the afternoon. Because we were out there so many days, a lot of just kind of hanging out, hiking, that sort of thing. Your life tempo is very different than it would be in your everyday life with work and all that stuff. Your priorities are simple. What are we going to investigate today? What are we going to eat?
Sure.
What are we going to do? That sort of thing. It's just an amazing kind of change of pace. And so we're all hanging out, just kind of taking a nap, and we're all being lazy. And I decide to get out, and maybe it was about 6 or 7 p.m. So it's still pretty light out. I decided to go out and get some just B-roll shots of the mountains with the fog and everything. It looked really cool because most of the time the weather out there, it's a temperate rainforest. It does get can be pretty rainy, but we had like incredibly nice weather. It was sunny pretty much every single day almost out there, except for this day. So we're like, okay, this is cool. And I'm deciding to kind of just get some shots. And I happened to be filming what I think was a sea lion just swim through the bay. And I had my camera focused on that area. And I hear just this gunshot noise just come from the hills. I couldn't tell from which direction because the bay is like an amphitheater. So it's a little strange, but I'm kind of like, and then I go back inside and the same guy, John, who heard it the other day, where his room is in the cabin, it's on the second floor, and it has like a window that he always keeps open up there so he can hear stuff. And he basically comes out and immediately says to me, "You heard that, right?" I said, "Yeah, I thought I heard a gunshot." He said, "Well, I heard 2 more as you're coming in now." And we're like, okay, that's weird. I mean, there shouldn't be anyone shooting out there. I mean, we would know if there was somebody there. Again, just how isolated of a location it is, really unusual. I mean, and then we talked to Scott, and he's like, yeah, we hear that kind of stuff all the time. That's either like the power knocks or that sort of thing. I kind of called it the mystery gunshot. And talking to David Ellis, his looking at the audio, basically says that if you record a gunshot sound or something like that, there will be two signatures. You'll see the initial gunshot and sort of the after blast. But in our ears, that just sounds like a single gunshot noise. Whereas this sound, it's a singular just sound. So some kind of percussive, some kind of rock on rock or something like that. I can't even guess what it is, but it was really loud. And again, the closest thing I related to instantly was a gunshot. I thought there's somebody out here shooting. And I mean, they've never run into anybody out there shooting. I mean, there's other cabins along coastal Alaska, but nowhere close to this one. You'd have to take a boat ride to get to some of the other ones. So, somebody just stumbling around hunting in these millions of acres up there, what are the chances, right? So, and it was just weird that it would happen at times where the first time it was when we were getting out of the cabin or getting out of the woods to head back to shore. And the other time was like right when I got out of the cabin and was hanging outside. I mean, it was kind of coordinated. And Scott had told for the years that they would come before they even had a dock built out there. The moment they'd get into the bay and they'd start paddling to shore, they'd hear that kind of noise coming from the hill behind the cabin, which was like a 2,000-foot hill, or not 2,000-foot hill, but a mountain that goes up 2,000 feet. And then there's a hill. They would always hear it from that direction. So I can't really guess what it is. I mean, I've had a lot of people, as I said, suggest, was it ice breaking? Was it something else?
Yeah.
Chris Spencer, also of the Olympic Project, talked about hearing similar things while he was on Prince of Wales Island in Alaska working a number of years ago. And they would hear the same kind of thing at night from the mountains. And it was sort of unusual. So I can't guess what it is, but it just was weird because it was consistent with a lot of the stuff that Scott and other people who spent more time out there reported over the years.
Wow.
I was going to ask you too, a lot of researchers or a lot of people that are out hiking, in the wilderness, sometimes you get the reports that they felt like they were being watched or felt that they were not alone. So I'd imagine, I don't know. I mean, looking at the wilderness that you're in the middle of literally Alaska, did you ever get that sense of feeling or maybe not that, but did it just feel, because I take it this is the only place you've been that's quite like this, right? So was there a lot of mystery? Was it more of a mystery for you, or did you think that maybe, there was something out here?
I don't know. I mean, maybe a little bit of both. I mean, I've only had 2 times in my time out in the woods, well, maybe 2 or 3 that I could say I got this super distinct we're being watched feeling. And one of them was in an area, there's a research area I have here in New Hampshire where I was with a buddy and I had this insanely, I could feel this feeling of something watching me and I'm thinking it in my head. And my buddy literally at the same time blurts out, dude, I think we're being watched. It was the weirdest moment I've ever had. It was like we synced up or something. And then after that, we proceeded to hear something wood knocking and breaking sticks for like 15 minutes. And I'm recording with audio. And he didn't know anything about Bigfoot or anything in the area. And he was tearing his head. And a couple other times, the other incident was in that same area. And there's been times we were hiking in Utah where we had stuff wood knocking, where we did feel like kind of something was watching us. But out in Alaska, at this location, I can't say we felt that ever. I mean, it was at least not distinctively. I didn't feel it as distinct as I did on these other occasions. But the thing about that area, and I think we kind of showed that a little bit, is, we initially thought there's this little kind of point that goes out from the cabin. I mean, there's these massive mountains that are behind it. There's the bay, but there's this point that goes out, and we're like, oh, that's like a small little environment. We'll go hike it and check it out. And it took us a lot longer to get to the point, and it's just rough terrain. There's small game trails, not a lot of use out there. And we're thinking, okay, well, you could be on this side right here hiking. Something could be at the point and easily just go around the other side and you would never even see it. Whether it be, we know that there's mountain goats out there and moose and bear and other stuff. We didn't see anything in the immediate area. When we were hiking up the mountain, where we really did like a brutal bushwhack up into the snow line, we were basically on the heels of a black bear. He was really high up and we could find his prints in the snow. So we knew that there was stuff out there, but we never got this feeling of being watched. I mean, the one night we had the really kind of prominent incident of where we're sitting around the fire and we start hearing these rocks being tossed into the water, and these super clear wood knocks. we were all just kind of like caught off guard, and there was a sort of excitement and dumbfoundedness, but there wasn't a time where we had this kind of super peering feeling. So I don't know if maybe that means there wasn't anything around us in the daytime. I don't know, possibly, but like I said, I've only ever had that feeling a couple other times in the woods, and there's been other areas where I've been in where I think there's been a Sasquatch nearby. We've heard like whoops and wood knocks and other stuff like in Bluff Creek, and nobody really had that, being watched kind of feeling. There was other than the dog that was with us that was tail between its legs. So it's unusual, but that area is just so vast, and I think we as humans are just so pathetically adapted to traversing that kind of habitat. I mean, we could hike through, but we probably look like clowns compared to the other animals that are easily traversing this terrain. So if something like a Sasquatch is living out there, or multiple, I mean, they are probably going to outclass us in every way. So it's just a difficult place to operate in, but I can't say we had a distinctive kind of being watched feeling, or at least myself. I don't know about any other guys. They didn't report any of that, but
I noticed you guys had a bunch of trail cams you put out there. And the one thing I did want to ask, which I was trying to figure out what you guys were talking about, because I know what a trail cam is, but then you guys were putting out sensors. And I was just, for the life of me, what type of sensor, like a motion sensor, or a laser? If it gets tripped, you would get a beep on the phone or something? Or, I mean, what was that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the issue was that they had put out trail cameras at one point during the first few seasons at the cabin, and they had noticed like 4 of them had been ripped off of the trees, and there's no obvious bear damage. I mean, I've seen videos of bears attacking trail cameras, and they like the smell of the plastics or something like that. It can remind them of ants and that sort of stuff, depending on what chemical in the plastic, like some sort of chemical. I've heard that happen with styrofoam as well, where it smells like kind of honeybees and that sort of thing. So none of that damage. I mean, they had the incidents with the peanut butter, but then they were like, okay, then they started saying, well, let's put out sensors, just motion sensors. Like you could put one up on your property or outside your house where, I remember as a kid, like I was subscribed to some spy, kind of like kids thing. And they'd send you a package every couple months where there's some like spy gadgets, magnifying glasses. And there was this little sensor there. You put it up basically in between a hallway, and there's, a beam that goes through. You don't see the beam, but as you walk by, it's like a motion sensor. So it's like those, but there's more professional grade ones, obviously, that are used to detect motion. So they would put them up in the trees, and they would see, like, the sensors will tell you if they have a hit or anything like that, or they'll go off or something. They started doing that, and the more low-tech approach, which I think works pretty well, is putting up trip wires. So you'll put trip wires up at 7 feet high or 6 feet high. So it kind of eliminates maybe other creatures that might trip it for the most part. See if, you're not really going to say, oh, the Sasquatch was just here, but you can say, well, something maybe walked through here just based off of the tripwire going off. So that's kind of what they were struggling with. Like I said, they put out cameras before and haven't had much success. I mean, overall with the Sasquatch topic, the trail camera thing doesn't seem to work very well. I mean, a lot of other animals can see IR. I've got footage of deer looking straight into the camera as the IR is going off. I've got coyotes getting scared when they realize they're in the camera and they run off like something's chasing them, kind of thing. So we know certain animals can detect IR. I think primates like apes and chimps have really good cognitive abilities of recognizing patterns. I wouldn't be surprised if you were to put up some trail cameras in an area with some chimps and gorillas, and they are going to be extremely cautious about approaching it and that sort of thing until they feel comfortable enough. And I'm not saying Sasquatch is akin to an ape or a gorilla, but I'm just kind of basing it off of analogies here. I know these things seem to be more human-like, in my opinion, at least, or more closer to us. But the thing with the cameras we put out were time-lapse cameras, so they don't give off IR. They don't work at night. So the idea was just, okay, let's put them out there. Maybe they're a little disguised, they're a little unobtrusive. So I mean, maybe you'll see some of the other animals moving through the area, right? Because we know there's porcupines, we know there's possibly bear. We had a lynx in the area at one point. Maybe we'll get one of them. We'll put it by the water. The best case scenario is maybe you get like a figure that walks through the trees in the background because it has a pretty wide field of view. That was kind of our intention. I don't think we're going to get one walking up right next to it and waving kind of thing, but possibly just having your kind of bases covered. We got no wildlife at all, and they were deployed for a few days, and nothing. And we knew there were animals in the area. Like we literally, one of the nights we had the cameras out, there was a lynx not that far from, and we heard it multiple days on the audio at night. So, I mean, it's just weird.
It was pretty weird because as I'm watching, I'm like, I'm sure they have these trail cams, and I'm sure that, again, I'm not a filmmaker, obviously, but I'm sure that if he caught some other wildlife, you'd have put him into the film. So I just thought it was really odd that there was like the porcupine and maybe a bear going up the mountain.
That was it. That was the only thing we got on those cameras,
Gosh, now to me that would have been a little bit eerie because I was going to think going there, you'd see all sorts of moose, bear. I mean, literally with your head on a swivel, not necessarily for Sasquatch, but for the other predators out there, right? I mean,
we did encounter a lot of the known wildlife, but not in the immediate area around.
Okay.
So it was like we'd see whales and stuff in the bay, or when we traveled to that glacier, that's when we saw possibly a brown bear up on the hill. And then after we had tried to hike to the glacier, we found lots of moose sign, tons of big moose prints. Coming back, we saw like 3 or 4 black bears just spaced out on the mountain above us, just feasting because it was the springtime and they're out digging for grubs and other kind of critters that they can find, that are bury themselves in the hill. So we did see a lot of wildlife, but not really in the immediate area of the cabin. The only footage we got was, Ron, who was on the team, he had put a trail camera in like a hollowed out tree, and we got a porcupine going up the hill. That was like the only wildlife we got in the immediate area of the cabin, other than small stuff, birds. And there's actually martins that will come up to the cabin and they'll come up on the deck and try to eat leftover food and just kind of be pests and that sort of thing. But nothing big in the immediate area of the cabin. Well, we knew there was sign. I mean, we were hiking up the mountain, following mountain goat trails. We're finding their scat. Supposedly there's a Sitka deer in the area too. So, I mean, we found bobcat tracks, or not bobcat, excuse me, lynx. They don't have bobcat up there. Lynx is the only feline they have up in Alaska. There's no bobcat or mountain lion. So, it was just unusual that we didn't experience anything else, but we heard lots of sea lions. We saw them in the bay. We saw a sea otter at one point just flying the drone around. But at night, we did hear, especially when we camped up on the ridge behind, kind of on the hill above the cabin, we heard what sounded like stomping and wood knocking and something moving around. And we tried to kind of get out with the thermal camera, but it was a rainy sort of night. It was weird. Then the night after that, we just heard a lot of sea lions. We didn't hear any of those similar sounds that we heard that night before.
Alek, we got about 1 minute before we got to take our 5-minute break. I just want to make a quick comment. I've probably done 100 interviews with researchers, a couple filmmakers, and the people that have seen Bigfoot or had encounters. And I got to tell you, when it comes to the trail camera, I don't think I've had one person, or even watching any documentaries on television, I don't think anybody, and I've been doing this for 2 years, has caught anything on a trail camera. You're better off with a camera getting a blob squatch.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it has a lot to do with maybe that IR, but again, going back to that pattern recognition, they could say, well, this thing doesn't belong here. I'm going to avoid it. I mean, the only ones I've seen that are possibly credible are something very far in the distance, maybe a figure moving through the trees again, but more blob squatch like. But chimps and other primates are known to avoid trail cameras at first. So I wouldn't be surprised if these things maybe do the same. I don't know.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to go to our 5-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a harrowing encounter, and it has nothing to do with Bigfoot when I come back. And then we'll continue on with Aleks Petakov, Small Town Monsters. You got to go check him out on YouTube. All his films are fantastic. We will be back in 5 minutes. Hang tight.
4 minutes to go, folks. 4 minutes. Three minutes. We're almost there. Two-minute warning, guys. 2-minute warning. One minute. 1 minute.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome back to Brunch with Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. We got a great show. Aleks, Petakov, adventurer, explorer, filmmaker. You can find him on Small Town Monsters on YouTube, across the channel. Just a great show going on. Thank you for that. Also, thank you, Crystal J, for the super chat. Of course, the super chat is open and a great way to help support the channels. I do appreciate you for that, Crystal. Don't forget, Mondays is Texas Front Porch. That's on at 7:30 in the East on Mondays. Followed by Tuesdays is Van Buren Variety. That's 8 o'clock in the East on Tuesday. Also on Tuesdays is Beyond BMR at 9 o'clock in the East. Jason McLean does something called Mysterious Library on Radio AM, Untold Radio AM, I should say. That's 10 o'clock in the East. Wednesdays, 9 in the East. Once again, Jason McLean questions everything. Thursday is right back here with Brunch with Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. That's at 1 in the East. Tonight, the Blondes and the Booze Paranormal Podcast, 9 o'clock in the East. Friday, more woo with the booze. The blondes, the booze, and the woo. 9 o'clock in the East. Jessica Jones on the weekend, Space Out Radio. 10 o'clock in East Saturday and Sunday. She also has a daytime show on the Cryptid Huntress channel. Don't forget to subscribe to Bigfoot Michigan Rob, the Blondes and the Booze Paranormal Podcast, Texas Front Porch, and go check out Small Town Monsters if you have not already. You can find all of Alex's great work over there. Speaking of Spaced Out Radio, May 19th through the 21st is Dave's second annual Spaced Out Radio fan party in Las Vegas, Nevada. Go to the Brunch with Bigfoot Michigan Rob YouTube page for details. Thank you very much. And we're going to bring up Krista and Aleks.
Hey.
Welcome back, Krista and Aleks, to the show.
Yes.
Great show. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely, it is. I do. Before we let Aleks go, though, at some point, I'd like to talk to him about the cabin there in, I guess it's Ohio, that you guys do research around that area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're going to wrap up a little bit the Alaska talk. We did a good hour of it. And because Aleks is just more than that. I just that's the guy's got over 1.6 million. I mean, it's fantastic work. I did want to spread the word, but everything else, you guys, is fantastic. It's fantastic. I like to, though. Okay, Aleks didn't come across any Bigfoot, right? I guess we don't know. Probably not. Who knows? But he did have an encounter that he was a part of, kayaking. I tell you what, man, I was watching it, and all of a sudden I see nothing but water and bubbles, and I'm like, uh-oh.
Right.
Oh, boy.
I
Yeah.
saw that too. That's scary.
That was scary, dude. I was scared. I said, what's going on here, man?
That was a very scary moment. Yeah, part two, myself and Ron were taking some sea kayaks out, and our idea was to just paddle around the bay, and we're like,
Uh-oh.
Oh, sorry. You're good.
No worries.
That was my bad. I hit the wrong button.
No worries. So we're trying to paddle out, and we basically, kind of smooth in the bay. Those sea kayaks, they're very, and I've been in kayaks plenty of times, but not in the ocean. They're very kind of tippy. They have a different kind of rudder system in the back, and they're a little bit different than like a kayak you would use in a river or a lake. So they're very kind of the balance is tough, and I have all this equipment on me or whatever, and we're going out and we make it out towards the bay, and there's a lot of waves coming in, and the rest of the guys were out fishing, so they had taken the bigger boat and they were going to go catch us some dinner, try to get some fish and fry it up and have a good dinner. And we're kind of around the bay in this other area, and all of a sudden I just see Ron just flip over, and we're maybe a couple hundred feet from the shore. That's like deep Alaskan, like a remote Alaskan bay. I mean, the water wasn't exactly warm, and I'm panicking myself. Like I think I had a clip in there where I'm like, I'm breathing really heavily. I'm just trying to get over there to help him. And I hear him screaming. I don't want to tip over myself, because then we're in real trouble if we're both in the water. He was able to flip the kayak, but he couldn't get back in. I mean, he was so heavy. He had like a jacket on and all his other clothing and stuff. And out of all of the equipment he had on him, the only thing he ended up losing was his sunglasses. They sank into the ocean, but everything else was on, and the camera was intact, all good. I made it over to him, and I basically had him grab on the back of my kayak, and we kind of made it to the shore. I was able to get him on the rocks, and then I had to try to land, and I couldn't land. Luckily, the guys saw us on the big boat, and they managed to come out there with the Zodiac, rescue us, basically take us straight back to the cabin and put Ron in front of the wood stove and just hang out, because our other idea was if they hadn't seen us, we were just going to land on shore and we would just hike back in the woods to the cabin. I mean, it would take us a while, but that was the best course of action. That was the only thing we could have done. So that was a very, very frightening kind of moment. And thankfully Ron was okay. I mean, his phone and audio recorder were ruined in the process, unfortunately, but that's a small price to pay compared to what could have been. I mean,
absolutely.
Current taking him out. So yeah, we were super thankful the way it turned out.
What was the temperature out that day? Because I'm thinking hypothermia or.
Yeah, I mean, the weather, it was okay in the sun. I mean, I would say maybe in the 50s or the 60s. So low 60s maybe, but probably somewhere in the 50s. And we still had to wear like a light kind of windbreaker kind of thing. And the water was cold. The water was probably in the 40s.
Yeah.
So, it was like a tough moment.
Yeah, I know that you're very lucky.
I know that eventually you got to the back of the kayaks, but right in the onset, though, I said, okay, he was in the front and you were trying to maneuver with two kayaks. I said, I got to see him pull this off because that looks pretty difficult.
It was tough. And that's why I was like, dude, just hang on to the rope on the back and I'll just pull you as best I can. And we got to the shore, we got to the rocks. He was able to get himself over there and climb up on the rocks. And I had to make sure I didn't flip either. So then the guys show up on the boat and I tried to go on shore to land and I couldn't. I hit the rocks on the shore and I started flipping over and I'm like, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to go back on the boat with them. Not even going to worry about it. And it was, I'm not getting back on one of those things again. That was pretty sketchy. Right. But that was just one of those things that it can happen anywhere or anytime when you're out there, but especially in a location that remote, we're just super glad it turned out the way it did, not worse. But on another note, I have something to share here. I don't know if I think I shared this on maybe the Blondes and Booze when I was on there, but this is one of the rocks actually from Alaska that these are the ones that they would report getting thrown into their boat when they'd be moored out in the bay. And they're all along the shore in Alaska. And I figured I'd show one here for the audience. I have it on my desk here with some of my other stuff. And basically it's just a rock that they would put in plastic and they would use it because it was cheaper than metal or lead to weigh down their fishing nets. And you can find these discarded across the beaches all along coastal Alaska. And these are the ones that they would find, again, thrown into their boat, as well as just placed in unusual spots. I mean, there's just so many of them you could see them over there. So Rob Roy Menzies kind of jokingly named them the Squatch rocks, the rocks that Squatch prefers. So I thought I'd show that.
It seems like there was a lot of odd placements of rocks throughout the entire video, the entire program. They made mention there was one rock on a stump, a mossy stump that you could tell was placed there because it looked like it was newly put there, it seemed like, and no one knew what they did with that one.
No one remembers putting it there. There's other stuff that's happened that I didn't get to include in the documentary that we'll cover in the future. Like just other weird incidents that maybe somebody might look at as, okay, maybe not Bigfoot, but maybe weird. And one of them that Scott had told me was of a hatchet that they had that went missing one season. They were like, oh, somebody must have dropped it somewhere and maybe it fell into like some moss and it's just gone. And so they already bought a new one. And the next season, they're coming out to the cabin. They find that hatchet that was missing from last summer placed up against the side of the cabin as if it had just been there the whole time.
Wow.
And they all had searched for it, and they knew it wasn't one of them that had done that. There was like these same rocks placed on the rusty chair out there. Just other kind of unusual things like that sort of a lot of people in the topic report. So weird, but
it is weird. And maybe it was some sort of like a gift or something, that they were trying to give you.
Something mischievous. I mean, taking a hatchet and just hanging onto it for a whole winter, that's kind of
right. Well, then replace it with the rocks on the chair. Who knows, but
strange,
it's pretty crazy.
There's one other thing I gotta like to ask before we move on. So we're to flip it. We're to go from the extreme Alaska. Then I like to talk a little bit about this Florida, and if you don't mind, the swamp ape. Yeah. One thing I did have to ask, I noticed those fish that you guys were catching. I'm like, because I know you're not going to show you guys every time you're eating. But number one, are you guys good fishermen or out on the boat? Number two, those fish, pretty lean, man. You had to catch like 50 of them to fill up one person to look like. I mean,
we had probably about I want to say less than a dozen because, each of the rock fish, that's what we were catching.
Yeah, that's
It was a little too early in the season for halibut, which would have been a much bigger, a lot more meat on them. But the fillet is very small on the rockfish. It's basically down to an area behind their gills before their tail on each side. So you get two basically pieces about that big on each. So we caught a few, and each of us would take 2 or 3 of those fillets once we fried them up and like put them into a wrap and eat it with some like hot sauce or something like that. So there wasn't a lot of meat, unfortunately.
How was the rockfish? Tasty?
It was good. It was very fresh. I mean, it wasn't my favorite fish that I've eaten.
Yeah.
I was just down in Louisiana and I got to eat a lot of the crawfish and all that other seafood they have there, which is delicious. So I wouldn't say it was my favorite fish I've had, but out there we also had Alaskan salmon that Scott had previously caught, and he would freeze a lot of the meats and stuff that did a lot of hunting. So we ate moose, caribou, salmon steaks, all kinds of stuff from previous catches that he had. And that was just incredible eating. I mean, we were eating like kings.
Wow.
Yeah, awesome. So we're going from one climate to the next. One totally different terrain, I'm sure. So Florida, you went to South Florida. Now we're talking, Sasquatch. Now they call it the skunk ape, right?
Right.
And I tell you what'd you think about Florida and going down in those? Were you in the Everglades or the whereabouts were you guys down there?
So just recently in January, we were down in extreme southern Florida. So Big Cypress Preserve, which is basically just north of the Everglades. It's kind of one big area, and west of there. But we've been to Florida. We went last year as well, 2022. We did basically 4 expeditions in Florida. We did like a whole trip from the Everglades to the Green Swamp area, and then to Ocala National Forest and the Panhandle. So we went with a lot of different researchers, Stacy Brown, Matt from Central Florida Bigfoot, other folks just in their kind of respective research areas. So we saw Florida from top to bottom, from that kind of palmetto prairie environment that's down in Big Cypress that almost looks like savannas in some areas, to the extremely thick jungle looking area in Central Florida with the Green Swamp, to Ocala National Forest, which is like pine hardwood forests with sand roads, and then very similar environment up on the Panhandle area. So you see how different those kind of terrain look like. The most recent trip was a return back to extreme South Florida. So the lair of the Florida panther and supposedly the skunk ape. And that's where there's, Collier County, Florida has the most sightings per the BFRO for Florida. It's like Collier County, I think Polk County, which is up by Ocala National Forest, and the county outside of the Green Swamp have the most amount of reported sightings. So that's where, there's a lot of these kind of stories.
Wow.
So go ahead, Krista.
I would feel like, if you go to Florida, Alaska doesn't have the snakes. However, Florida has a lot of the poisonous snakes. You really have to, a lot of critters down there that will eat you, more so than I feel like in Alaska.
Oh yeah, I tell you, Florida is like, I describe it jokingly as the Australia of North America. You have it's the only place in the world where you have alligators and crocodiles that live in the same place. You have tons of alligators, lots of snakes. I've never actually seen a snake in Florida, believe it or not. They've got the invasive pythons too, but weeks ago when I was in Louisiana, I saw a bunch of cottonmouth snakes, which I have never really seen before. Seen them up close and kind of, I saw one outside my car. It's scary, but in Florida, we're always aware of it. But then also in that extreme southern Florida area, you have black bears. We saw a black bear across the road last year in front of us. There's the Florida panther stuff down there, and that's a topic I'm really interested in. And I'm actually working also on a doc that I filmed while we were down there about the Florida panther. And I actually have some of the casts right here. This is one of the Florida panther casts we got. I have a whole bunch of them here, and this is we think was possibly a juvenile or a panther kitten. So you can kind of see the size. And this was walking parallel to the larger one, and we had found a lot of the tracks. And they're kind of an endangered species. They are basically a mountain lion. They're no different than mountain lions. They just live in southern Florida. So you've got a habitat that supports, it's like 3 million acres or so of protected land, larger than the state of Rhode Island, where you have bear, panther, tons of deer, lots of animals, and that habitat supports all those critters. And then you have all these reports of the skunk ape. So of course, it's really interesting to be in that area. Last year, while in Big Cypress, we possibly heard a wood knock incident and found an area where there's some kind of like a weird looking track that we were kind of intrigued by, but it was all muddy.
Wow.
But the wood knock was unusual because my buddy Tate had done a knock, and it was like less than 2 minutes later, we got a response that was virtually identical in sound. It almost sounded like somebody was copying us. And we know for a fact we were the only people out there. We were deep within Big Cypress. There's like one road in, one road out. And you see cars coming from 10 miles away on that road because of how flat it is. It's just a straight road. There was nobody else out there. It was just unusual. So we returned to some of those same areas, and we went to areas outside of Big Cypress. And it's just such a different environment to work in because you're dealing with the heat. You got to watch every step. I'm from the northern part of the Appalachian Mountains, so I'm used to moose and bear and big stuff. That's like my threat level is I'm looking for the bigger critters. We don't have very many venomous or poisonous things around here that are small. Whereas out there, you've got the pythons, the invasive pythons, you've got the gators, the cottonmouths, the copperheads, the coral snakes, which are all venomous. So, and it's the same kind of thing dealing with it in Louisiana. Same sort of thing I dealt with just now when I was out there. So it's a little bit out of my element. I much prefer being in more mountainous areas like Alaska or the Appalachians or the Rocky Mountains. But there's something unique about swamps and those kind of wetland environment that really make it cool.
Yeah, I was going to ask you too, for those of you just joining late, the first hour of the show, we talked about the Alaskan Sasquatch and the film that Aleks put together. Fantastic job on that. And for those joining late, I am saying hi to you. If you can't see me, we are streaming on 2 channels, my channel and Texas channel. For those that are new, thank you for coming on board. So we talked, Aleks, about the howls. We went over the howls in Alaska. Now, when you were down in Florida, did you capture any vocalizations, or was it I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, nothing. I mean, all the times we've been in Florida between last year and this year around, we haven't heard any vocalizations. Actually, I should say in the Panhandle area, we did hear some very distant kind of noises. I don't know if they were vocalizations or not, but we heard that potential wood knock in Florida last year. And then on the Panhandle, we had heard multiple wood knocks. I mean, we had like 2 teams, Stacy Brown, some of those guys, and my buddy Tate was up with some other folks, and they heard some wood knocks, and they saw like a orb thing fly through the trees, and they were like really weirded out by it. It was super unusual. I was with a different team, so we were like further on a different trail, so we didn't hear any of that. But this year, while we were in South Florida, Tate and I were hanging out, cooking some dinner on the side of this old road in this really weird forest called the Picayune Strand Forest, which was like destined to be it was logged out because they were going to sell it as real estate, but then it was a big scam, and people got scammed out of their money buying useless swampland, as it was described. And so that land sat there. So you have this really weird environment where you have like grids of streets in like square patterns, but it's all just tracts of trees and land and woods. So that's where we found a lot of the panther tracks. There's a ton of habitat there. Wow. We were just pulled over on the side of one of these roads one night, just cooking some dinner, kind of hanging out, using the little jet boil kind of things to make some freeze-dried food, that sort of thing. And we both at one point heard what we thought sounded like wood knocks, but we actually didn't say anything to each other because it was so nondescript, it was not even worth mentioning. But then we're both getting ready to do a night hike, and I have my thermal camera. Tate's getting something out of his Jeep, and we both hear this tree come crashing down in the woods right behind us. We're immediately kind of like, okay, that's kind of weird. And then we started checking out that area. We were looking around, nothing in the thermal. We didn't hear anything move away or any other noises. It was just that one kind of odd noise. I can't obviously say what that is. I have no idea. But we tried to go through the possibilities of, okay, was it just a coincidental tree fall? Because trees do fall. It happens, sure. If it's some kind of animal, we'd expect to maybe hear it move away. We didn't hear anything else the rest of the night. So that's kind of the only thing. So I guess audio-wise, the only things we've heard in Florida are potential wood knocks and that sort of thing. Nothing really that definitive. We talked to a lot of witnesses and a lot of folks who have experienced stuff out in the swamp, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of vocalizations and that sort of thing reported from Florida in general, at least from what I'm aware of. I've not heard a lot of like loud vocalizations or anything like. Imagine a place like Alaska, there's just a lot more space. These things maybe you're not used to humans as much, whereas I feel like areas where there's tends to be a lot more people, you get less vocalization reports just because of maybe having to adapt to being quiet. I mean, I don't know. That's just complete theory, but I have not heard a lot from Florida audio-wise.
Wow.
Did you capture any alleged or possible tracks or anything unusual during your research or filming?
Specifically in Florida or in general?
Yeah, in Florida, yeah.
So we had found before the night of that wood knock incident from our last year. So if you go, on our channel, you can find the Sawgrass Skunk Ape is the name of that documentary. We found off trail this kind of weird mud patch. There were these 2 sort of like foot impressions there. It was so nondescript. I mean, even if I did like a boot print, you could kind of tell it was just sort of like a blob looking kind of, it looked like a track, but it was just a blob. And those 2 were in the mud, and right near the track, there was a lot of broken trees as if something had walked through the brush. And there was just trees that were kind of snapped in a kind of unusual pattern. We couldn't really cast anything. It was just super muddy and tough, but it was weird. It was the same area we heard that wood knock that night. So, I can't really speculate.
I was going to ask you too, because I've come across a lot of people or researchers that, of course, you can get tracks in a muddy terrain, or something's rained, like in Montana, Michigan, Ohio, Louisiana, even. But when you're going dredging through the swamps, I mean, my opinion, okay, is that the ground is so moist. I'm sure that's really difficult to get anything as far as the track goes, legible,
that's
distinctive.
Right. That's what I've heard. I mean, I know a few people have alleged tracks, and some of them are kind of suspicious. We'll put it that way. When we found these panther tracks, it was on a road. It's on a dirt road that then gets a little bit of moisture. So, and you've got animals. We saw tons of bear and hog walking across these trails. So, that was pretty obvious. But these animals aren't exactly, as elusive as something potentially like a skunk, Sasquatch type thing. But those, like I said, those tracks were probably the closest thing we had seen to anything, because it was an area off trail and it was just kind of unusual, especially with the brush being broken and snapped. But you just have to be in the right place where you don't have enough water for there to be good track. We found alligator slides and alligator prints. But it was very distinct areas kind of out in the open. Again, those animals are not really looking, I guess, to stay stealthy. They're just kind of doing their thing. We did find, which is weird, a couple times barefoot human footprints out on the trails there in Florida. So that means there's people going out there running around barefoot in areas with many different types of venomous snakes and gators. So there are some crazy people who do that kind of thing. But nothing other than it was distinctly human. You could tell the arch. You could see the toes are scrunched up like somebody's been wearing a shoe their whole life.
Can you tell us a little bit about the cabin that you guys do research at, if you don't mind? Because I've watched a lot of the different shows that you guys have put out, and you guys have gotten some pretty interesting things there too.
Yeah, I mean, I only spent a little bit out there on a few occasions, but Seth and Heather were really focusing on that property. That's out near Minerva, Ohio. So it kind of connects to the whole Minerva monster story. And basically it's a cabin that's on hundreds of acres of private land. And they were kind of experiencing some weird stuff out there. There's been a lot of sightings in that immediate area. Gotcha. We interviewed a few people from that area who had sightings like in the immediate area, including a guy who was a family member of the folks that had some of the original Minerva monster stuff going on back in the 70s. So that property, like I said, we went out there summer of 2021 after we had come out from a trip out west in Utah and Colorado. And we went out there and spent some time with Seth and the rest of the crew. And we'd heard some possible wood knocks and recorded some wood knocks at night and that sort of thing. But there was an instance where I was up in a tree stand just to kind of illustrate, even though it's a thick, very wooded kind of Eastern Ohio, typical brushy forest where you don't see a lot through it. I'm sitting up in a tree stand at night with a thermal, and all of a sudden I start seeing these things popping up on the thermal all around me. And I'd been surrounded by a group of coyotes, and I never even once heard them. I mean, if I hadn't had the thermal, I probably would have known they were even there. So those animals were able to move with such crazy stealth. That was wild. But Seth and them, I know, have experienced some stuff out in that property. We had found a lot of evidence of cow kind of graveyards where farmers had dumped their dead cows. And we were thinking, well, maybe is that like a food source? Is that why there's so many coyotes in the area? I've never seen an area with that many coyotes. It was like actually crazy how many there are. And we would see them running all the time through there's pipelines that go through that area. So it's an interesting area. I mean, we haven't been out there a lot. I haven't, at least. I know Seth and them have done some stuff out there, but it seemed like that first kind of fall, summer season, there was a lot of potentially weird stuff going on. And then it kind of like dropped down. I think they were doing some logging or something in the area. And it seemed like everything kind of just was like a crescendo, and there wasn't a lot of activity or suspicious activity.
Sure.
So I don't know what's going on, but that area of Minerva, like I said, has had a history of reports dating back to that Minerva monster case and even before then. And we interviewed a bunch of people who saw stuff in the area. We even did a recreation in our video where the lady she had like soybean fields in the back of her property, and that's where she saw this thing that she thought was a deer, and she's looking at it through the window, and it wasn't exactly close, and we're talking feet. And she felt like it was looking at her, and it stood up and then ran off into the woods through the soybean field. I tried to recreate it. So we had like a walkie-talkie or a phone, and I'm standing out there kneeling over, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to stand up. And I stood up, and she's like, yeah, it was bigger than you. And then I tried to run off, and I almost slipped in the soybean field. And she said this thing cleared that in like a few steps, but 5-6 steps, whereas it took me a while just to get to the tree line. So,
Wow.
that was interesting for me. I haven't done a lot of like recreations like that, so that was kind of cool. But yeah, it's a weird area. I mean, not something you'd expect, but then you look, it's not far from Pennsylvania. It's an area that technically it's part of Appalachia. It's part of the foothills of the mountains that, you go into West Virginia, parts of Pennsylvania, that's where you get a lot of reports. And unfortunately, that area now is kind of the area not far from that whole East Palestine train thing. So I only wonder what effects that's going to have on wildlife in the area, which is kind of a bummer. But that area has a long history of reports. I mean, going back to Don Keating and like the Sasquatch Triangle stuff. I know Amy Boo and other people investigate Eastern Ohio, and it's been going on for decades.
Wow.
One of my good buddies, Brown Dwarf, he's out in chat, floating around somewhere. He asked a question. Yeah, he had a question I was going to ask. Did you do any filming or research in Bluff Creek?
Yes, yeah, we've done stuff in Bluff Creek.
You did.
Actually, how I know kind of Brown Dwarf, I know he's friends with all my buddies. So Tate Hieronymus, who's part of the Bluff Creek project, Jonathan Easley, and those guys. He knows a lot of that Bluff Creek project crew. I think he lives up there in that area.
Yeah, I guess he wants to.
I guess he made a statement. Tell us about Bluff Creek. So if you want to appease my buddy, our mutual friend, I guess.
Yeah,
I remember watching the video some time back.
Yeah,
I think you went over the area, but go ahead.
A year and a half ago, yeah, we went out to, Tate and those guys in the Bluff Creek project. They have a kind of an annual camp out there in July, where a lot of researchers come out and kind of hang out and hit the area. And the first few days, it was like 3-4 days before a lot of people showed up. I went out there with myself, Eli, and Tate. It was just the three of us, and like, the moment we started driving in there, it was really getting weird. And to put it into perspective, this area is very remote to this day. I mean, we went to the place right near where the Patterson-Gimlin film was filmed, essentially. But it's like, you're not very close to Willow Creek. You got to drive over an hour just to get to the turnoff, which takes an old road called the Go Road, which was part of a formerly attempted highway to link that interior part of Northern California to the coast. But they ended up abandoning it the last few miles, so it's just like a dead highway that drives off in the middle of these mountains. Totally crazy environment. Like, it's amazing, beautiful, rugged country up there, truly Bigfoot country. Especially with all the lore, Bluff Creek, and all the tracks and everything in that area. So as soon as we started getting down in there, we'd had just weird stuff happen. The first night we're going in, and we had to stop at one area. There's these roads that basically just come to a cliff, and I mean, if you were to fall off in your car or even by yourself, you'd have a really tough time, and you might even die. And we had to stop to actually clear rocks because there was a rock slide area that had built up, and we were moving some of these boulders so we could get the cars through. And as we're doing that, and it's nighttime, I thought I heard some kind of noise up on the hill above. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. Disregarded it. Basically, I would pick up a rock and I'd throw it off to the side, and you'd hear it roll down the hill and crash into the creek below. And then at one point I start hearing rocks coming from the hill above, and I'm like, we start freaking out. I ran forward. The other guys ran backwards. I'm thinking, oh gosh, this rock slide is about to destroy our cars. And it was just a few rocks. It wasn't a big rock slide. Maybe 5-6 rocks like this came tumbling. I mean, one almost hit me in the leg. Probably would have broken my leg. I mean, just that thick and big. And I just got out of the way. And we're like, okay, that's weird. We kind of look up at the hill, and Tate thought he saw eye shine of something. So we're like focused up in this one little crack. There's all these trees up on this basically like eroded cliff, and there's trees and there's an opening. That's where he thought he saw eye shine. So he's going to grab his FLIR. I'm like, okay, that's weird. I thought I heard some like growl noise before when we got out of the cars, and we're focusing up on the hill. And then beneath us in the creek below, we hear what sounds like something walking away in the creek. Wow. So then we turn over there, and we're like, that's really weird. I mean, it was unusual. So we said, okay, what are the chances it could have been a coincidental rock slide? I mean, it happened, but we went up we hiked up to that cliff the following day and tried to recreate this and the only way we could do it was by piling up larger rocks and physically pushing them over the cliff. I mean, I can't say what that was. I don't really know. It was just unusual. That it was kind of set the tone for the whole trip. And then towards the end of the trip, once more people started showing up. This is the last incident I'll kind of talk about. that was really prominent. It was kind of me hearing like a very clear whoop. Essentially, we were being shown the area where the original tracks from the late 1950s were found with the Jerry Crew incident that kind of gave way to the word Bigfoot. Those are the tracks they found, took it to the newspaper. They called it Bigfoot, and that's where we have Bigfoot from. And we're being shown that area. And my buddy Ron Reed, who is the guy who flipped over in the kayak in Alaska, he was out there at Bluff Creek with us, and he's got this dog named Bandit, who's a hiking dog. He's hiked the whole Appalachian Trail, been all over the country hiking with Ron. I mean, they're really hardcore backpackers, and this dog has been exposed to bear and other wildlife. Suddenly the dog starts acting really weird, starts trying to duck into the side of the trail. Usually Ron said he does that when he's very frightened. That's his go-to. He'll hide in the bushes like a trail if they're hiking. He's on the side of the road trying to hike, and we're all looking at this area where these original Bigfoot tracks were found. And a couple of the guys in the back of the group were saying they thought they were hearing like movement and tapping in the woods. And my buddy Jonathan Easley of Western Bigfoot Exploration was one of them. And he was like, okay, this is weird. Ron never has to leash Bandit. And Bandit, we finally get him to come towards us. And this dog, tail straight between the legs. I mean, ears down. I mean, he was completely looked like he was not having a great time.
Wow.
We had to take Jonathan's belt and physically make a leash just to get this dog back to camp because he just kept trying to go to the side of the trail. So we're like, okay, this is weird. We get back to camp. Everyone's hanging around the fire. There's people cooking hot dogs, burgers, whatever, being loud. And where Ron's camp was, where he had set up his car, was at the edge of camp. And Bandit he was good. Like his tail's wagging. I happen to just be filming for whatever reason. And I walk over to him and I just say, hey, how's it going, Bandit? And I hear this whoop, whoop.
Wow.
Left. And I'm like, I immediately turn and you can see it. It's in the video. And I said, is that Ken? Because Ken Gearhart was there too. People there. And there was like guys would do whoops every once in a while. And I'm like, it's got to be one of these guys. And I turned to a couple people to my left who were like 10 feet from me. I'm like, did you guys just hear that? They said, no, we didn't hear anything. We were talking.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay. And then I ask everyone in camp. No one says they did a whoop. There are only two dogs in camp. One of them was Rowdy Kelly's of the Bluff Creek Project. Said it wasn't his dog. Well, obviously it wasn't Bandit. I was physically right next to him at the time.
Yeah.
And then later on, I had Chris Spencer check out the audio, and he thought it sounded very suspect, and just that combined with the other stuff that happened right before then, with the way Bandit was acting, people saying they were hearing like movement in the trees, and that area is extremely rugged. You have basically a cliff above you, the road you're on goes down another cliff, and there's thick brush and creeks. And when you're in Louse Camp itself, which is the famous camp that in the 50s was used by the guys that were basically paid by Tom Slick to investigate that area, you can't hear a whole lot because there's the creek that goes around there. Bobo had his sighting right in Louse Camp. Cliff Barrickman spent some time down there, describes there's been sightings of people swimming in the creek that have seen Sasquatches on the hill above them, and you can't hear it because of the creek. But I was far enough away from the center of camp where you're not really surrounded by these two creeks that I heard this. A few years ago, same area, my buddy Jonathan Easley had recorded some kind of noise that's on his it's in the documentary as well, where it's this weird shouting noise. He was doing like filming himself, and he didn't even hear this until days later. He didn't hear it while he was in camp, and it was like this kind of noise that the camera picked up, but he didn't actually physically hear it. So it's just one of the many weird things in Bluff Creek. We had other stuff happen. I mean, that was an amazing trip. We got to go into we slept literally right where Patty walked in the Patterson-Gimlin film.
How cool.
Down. It's so cool. So it's a cool area, but those are the incidents we had out there. And I mean, that's still one of the clearer whoops that I've heard out there. And the circumstances around it were weird with everything else going on. It was just kind of like left me sort of perplexed.
Yeah.
This entire subject is perplexing, and we're coming up towards the end of the show. That's why I've got a two-part question, and it's kind of going to put you on a spot just a little bit, but it's easy. Number one, throughout all your adventures, your research, your filmmaking, do you believe that Bigfoot exists? And the second half of the question, are you camp flesh and blood, camp woo, or undecided?
Those are good questions. Absolutely. Now, So question one, do I believe Bigfoot exists? I do lean towards Sasquatch existing, yes, in certain areas. I don't think they're everywhere, I mean, and I think that kind of leads more into my second question, my answer. I do believe they're more on the flesh and blood side, but I am a little bit undecided. And which I know is a bit of a cop out, but
no, it's not really.
Because here's the thing, right? I mean, I have come across a lot of reports. I've taken up to 50 reports from my home state of New Hampshire. At this point, I was trying to do the math the other day. I've interviewed probably 80 people alone for Beyond the Trail over the year and a half, almost 2 years doing that series. And I've talked to many people before that. So I don't even know how many people I've interviewed at this point. And like 95% of those, the way they report their encounter is, it was crossing the road, or it walked up the mountain.
Sure.
I saw it throw this at me or whatever, that kind of thing. There isn't any weirder elements. There are a few other reports, people reporting some of that kind of more paranormal stuff, the seeing people reporting the mind speak and that kind of thing. But I mean, in my view, I can't say that minority of reports, it's more of like that being the, that's not the rule, that's the exception kind of thing. Whereas majority of the reports I've come across, this thing is behaving in a way that seems to be, just like interacting with its environment. Does that mean it's flesh and blood? Not necessarily. I mean, even if it is something unusual, it's still clearly interacting with its environment. Prints, samples, throwing stuff. I mean, I've had a report of a guy seeing, rocket thrown to the screen in front of his face kind of thing. So that's like a physical thing, right? So maybe we don't understand what it is. I don't know. But personally, having seen all the habitat that's out in North America, I would have no problem believing something in some amount of numbers would be able to live pretty much unmolested in some of these areas, especially Alaska and the Appalachians. And if you look at where the sightings are reported, they seem to congregate in areas that are wilderness areas along wildlife corridors. So you don't see them in like all over random places, wildlife corridors. Very specific. If this was something that could just come and go wherever it wanted to, I would imagine there'd be more of a sense that you could see them in like a downtown city park kind of thing. So they seem to kind of cluster in certain areas, which is interesting. So I guess those are my answers, but I do lean towards it being real just because I've talked to so many people, and there's some sightings that are just so unbelievable in my mind that just, what else could they have seen other than something that's out there? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm most of the way there. I've never seen one. I've had, like I said, these weird incidents, stuff thrown, strange noises, but not like stuff that I can 100% say is definitely a Sasquatch, but seems to fit the bill of purported behavior. And that's a lot of the stuff that we're kind of basing some of the research on is, okay, we have all these sightings. This stuff seems to be consistently reported, is the rock throwing, the bluff charging, the certain behavior, the road crossings, the smell associated with a minority of reports, but still like corresponds to behaviors we have with other known species that are in the prime family. So I don't know what they are. I mean, they're really weird, but there seems to be something going on. That for me is kind of pretty clear.
Yeah,
I get that.
Yeah, there's definitely something going on. I like the way you kind of tiptoed around that. We'll have to have you come back for another show and get real deep into it, because I think they're flesh and blood, but I do think they've got a supernatural element, as you may mention, to live this long, all the strange encounters. There's something else. But
with this supernatural stuff, I mean, maybe it's just stuff we don't understand now. I mean, you think about like trying to explain cell phone technology to someone in the 1800s, they'll probably call you a wizard or something, right? You're magical, you're a magic man, So maybe it's just stuff we don't understand. I don't really know. I mean, but I'm not going to be one of those guys that completely shuts down one side because it doesn't agree with my view of what I think it is.
Yes,
I'm not going to say, hey, I don't believe in your encounter, right?
Now that is a great answer. Then I think
cherry picking. I'm not going to cherry pick.
Right? Absolutely.
I highly suggest going to the Land Between the Lakes, and you'll see a little woo out there. Guarantee it.
And I've seen weird things. I mean, I think I talked about actually on your guys' show with the UFO experience in Pennsylvania. Weirdest thing I've ever seen. I know there's weirder things out there, so I'm not like completely shut off to those ideas. I think it's there's just a lot we don't understand. I'll put it that way.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a great way to end it. Aleks Petakov, Small Town Monsters. Go check him out. He's got great work. Again, you guys, I know in the beginning of the show, I was just, yes, selling him. Well, it's not a sales job. I don't even care if you don't like the subject of Sasquatch. Beautiful presentation on your films, man. Choreography, everything perfect. I love the show. I appreciate all the guys over on that side of the channel as well. I'm going to have them on pretty soon as well. I do want to have you come back. Thank you to Crystal J for the super chat. Dave Scott, Space Out Radio. Thank you for the super chat. And until next time, love you all in chat. Thanks for returning and viewing each and every day. I do appreciate each and every single one of you. We all do. And
Tune
again,
into Blondes and Booze this evening.
the Blondes and Booze this evening. I might have to drive that show. No, Friday. I might be driving
Tomorrow
Friday.
nights, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, there's so many shows we got. I get confused.
Yeah. Tonight is Jeremiah and Stacy Fountain, and then tomorrow night is Aaron Thompson from 28 Days Haunted.
Awesome. So for Krista and for Aleks, this is BMR. Until next time,
See
we
y'all.
are out.
Thanks for having me on.
All right.
Thanks, Alex.